I watched the jury, Maria. I think there were 6 women, 6 men.
Okay.
It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to get a good jury up there.
That jury was picked so fast. 95% Democrats. The area is mostly all Democrat. You think of it as just a purely Democrat area. It's a very unfair situation, that I can tell you.
I mean, he didn't say anything really, like attacking them. He just said they're Democrats. It's a Democratic area. They're Democrats.
And it was unfair. But for Trump, that's an attack. I mean,
well, okay.
He's not just saying, "Oh, they're Democrats."
What to expect next week? Well, the Trump jury will officially begin deliberating. They're going to have closing arguments on Tuesday, and then the judge is going to instruct them on the law. Now, this is very important because the jury is the decider of fact. They get to decide what the facts are based on the conflicting or maybe different interpretations of the evidence. The judge is the one that decides the law, and the judge has to clearly explain the law to the jury. Otherwise, they can't do their job. So we saw the lawyers argue in front of the judge in order to try to get their interpretation of the law be what the judge adopts and instructs the jury on. Now, this is an issue that's likely appealed often because if the judge gets the law wrong and that's his job, that's a really strong issue on appeal. So there's a lot of very careful deliberation on it. So far from what we saw in the oral arguments, it seems like the judge is actually leaning in favor of the prosecution.
It was one of many attempts to derail his New York City criminal trial, and it failed again. Today, a New York appellate court rejected Donald Trump's bid to have Judge Juan Merchan recused from the case, citing Merchan's daughter's work consulting for Democratic clients. The judges ruled that Trump's defense team failed to prove that Judge Merchan overstepped his authority by refusing to recuse himself. It also upheld Merchan's decision, denying Trump's argument that some of Trump's social media posts were covered by presidential immunity. Now, these denials are all happening as we await a consequential ruling from Judge Merchan on jury instructions.
In terms of the interpretation of the law, he wants to keep it very close to the model jury instructions that's already part of the New York law. Some specific things that is certainly helpful for the prosecution is the fact that the judge said that he is going to allow the jury to decide what the unlawful means are in which that he was trying to conceal by falsifying the evidence, and the unlawful means the jury won't have to all agree on.
So before I let you go, I wanted to ask you, prison time is on the table here. There are sentencing guidelines. And I would note that Judge Merchan said last year that he regretted agreeing to a 5-month sentence for Trump company CFO Alan Weisselberg for tax crimes, saying he would have imposed a harsher punishment. We never know what a judge is going to decide. Of course, you know that well. But is it conceivable for people watching out there that if he's convicted, Trump could go to jail for this?
He most certainly will go to jail for this because he can't pardon himself. Let me repeat this. He's going to, if he's elected president, I hope that won't take place. He says can pardon himself, and he probably will try, but he cannot pardon. He cannot pardon a criminal conviction by a jury of a state crime. He must go to jail. I would not favor putting him behind bars. I would favor a house arrest, something less than behind bars, because he's an ex-president. But there's no question he will be incarcerated either in house arrest or behind bars if he's convicted.
If you remember, there were 3 object offenses, whether or not he was trying to conceal tax fraud or New York election law or federal election law. And basically the judge says, as long as they think that there is unlawful means, they don't have to decide which unlawful means. So that certainly helps the prosecution. Also helpful to the prosecution is whether or not he had more than one intention around concealing the checks. Was it because he was trying to protect his family and that's why he said it was a reimbursement? Or was he trying to protect his image and the presidency, and that's why he said it was a retainer? So did he say it was a retainer instead of reimbursement because of his family or because of the campaign? And the judge says, well, if it was even in part because of the campaign, that in itself is enough for it to have been trying to conceal a crime. Again, helpful for the prosecution. And whether or not the cause, he has to have caused the falsification of the document. They don't have to prove that he literally did this. We know there were employees of the Trump organization that filled out the ledgers. Trump signed some of those checks, Eric signed other ones of those checks. Perhaps the jury will see that differently when they decide their account. But what the law means about cause, will that be that if there was a reasonable expectation that the scheme that Trump did would cause people in his organization to put in the wrong ledger because they were going to put in retainer instead of reimbursement, that would be enough. So how the judge decides exactly that language is going to be very important. And we're going to all hear that in real time. I mean, we won't hear it, but there will definitely be people tweeting about it, and we can all read the transcript afterwards. That language to the jury is very important. And then once they get into that deliberation room, they already have a foreperson, because in New York, the first person seated on the jury is the foreperson. And ironically, the foreperson in this case wasn't actually born in the United States, which is ironic because Trump likes to rail against immigrants all the time. And it goes to show that when you come here into this country and you become, even if you're an immigrant and become a citizen, you are a full-fledged citizen, and you can actually be the foreperson and make really important decisions in the first ever historic trial of a president, a criminal trial of a president.
We're taking in people that are very, very sick with diseases that will be spread all over our nation. We're doing the wrong thing for our country. It's going to be very hard to recover from that, but we're going to start on day one with deportation. Okay?
So, yes. Do we welcome and bring in our immigrants? Absolutely. This foreperson shows it. So he's the foreperson, and then you have 11 other people on the jury. There are more men than women. Typically, men judge other men more harshly and women judge other women more harshly. So it doesn't actually help Trump that there's more men on the jury instead of women on the jury. Another interesting thing is that there are 2 lawyers. Usually people don't like lawyers on the case because they don't want their interpretation of the law to somehow override the judge's interpretation of the law. You don't need to know. You're not supposed to know the law whatsoever. But I think it's helpful here that there's 2 lawyers and not just 1 lawyer, because even if that lawyer were to talk about it based on maybe their opinion of the law, which they're not supposed to, but if somehow people wanted to give him more deference because he was a lawyer or she a lawyer, the fact that there's 2 kind of helps negate that. The other interesting thing is just how the jury deliberations will go. Their jury will go into a room after they get their jury instructions and start talking. Usually they tend to take an initial vote and decide, are they all on the same page? If they're all on the same page, they can go fairly quickly. If they're not all on the same page, then they can talk about whether their differences are. They can also request evidence and to see the evidence, to hear the evidence in case there's any questions or lingering questions. And how long will they go? We know that the trial has ended every day at 4:30 p.m. This is really dependent on the judge. Some judges like to keep to that schedule and ask the jury to deliberate only until 4:30 and have them go home. Others say, hey, you can deliberate for as long as you want because he wants them to be as productive as possible. So that will be also up to the jury. If for some reason the jury is having a hard time coming to a decision and they tell the judge that, the judge will give them an Allen charge and basically ask them to review and make a good faith effort to continue with their deliberations. But a jury can decide we are too far apart that we just can't all come together. And at that point, that's when you get a mistrial, which isn't an acquittal or a conviction. It allows the prosecution to rebring that indictment later and retry. It's basically up to the prosecution whether or not they want to do that again. The jury in New York can ask questions. So if they ask a question just on evidence, that's pretty easy. They can just have the evidence be seen. But if it's some sort of clarification or a definition, then both sides will come in and argue what they think the answer should be to that question. And then the judge will ultimately decide what that answer is and give the answer to the jury.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.